For the leg warmers, gauge is important so you're sure the tube will fit, and then also so you can calculate how many rows to crank to get the length you want. Start by casting on and cranking 50 rows in your project yarn. When we actually begin our leg warmer, we're going to cast on using the Juana Salvage Cast On, which requires us to remove half the cylinder needles. And we need to know which ones to remove so that they line up with the ribber needle slots. So if this is your first project with the ribber, you'll need to do a test. And in fact, if it's your first project for your particular cylinder dial that you're using, you'll need to use a test and make sure you know which cylinder needles line up with which ribber slots. So after you've finished your gauge swatch is a good time to test that. And so to do that, we're going to start by moving the main mark to 4 o'clock. Then I'm going to attach my ribber. There is another whole series of instructional videos, both on the Dina Bean YouTube channel and on our website, about exactly how to make sure the ribber is set up with the correct tension, how to assemble it, tips on using lube, etc. So if this is your very first project, I suggest you check that out now. We're going to go ahead, because this is just a swatch right now, we'll crank one more time. And our goal with doing that is to make sure that the ribber dial, the fin, is seated well against the ribber stop. So the ribber stop is what's installed inside the cylinder. The ribber fin is what comes down from the bottom of the ribber dial. And you want to make sure that they are well seated against each other. You can see I've actually marked where my ribber dial and this cylinder line up. But if I hadn't done that, this is how you would figure it out. Make sure you're working around the main mark, because that will help you later. And I'm going to simply switch out this cylinder needle for a ribber needle. To do that, I pull the cylinder needle forward, and I have the ribber needle going pointed down. I'm going to lift it up and off the back, and then remove that cylinder needle. Trying to do this without bumping the camera. And then you're going to push forward just a little bit, but you really won't need to make sure ultimately that the stitch is on top of the latch. So you'll see I'm kind of pinching it here, the stitch with my right hand, so that it doesn't go up and past the latch. As I've laid the needle down, then you can scooch it in. If the needle had popped forwards, the latch was on the front side of the stitch, you can just use your pick tool to lift it up and put it back. So now you crank forward a tiny bit. This is the working area where we always add needles. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple. I'm going to switch out this one. You need a few, because you actually create a little bit of drag on the ribber dial as you're cranking around. So you want to have enough needles in that you're getting that effect. This is also a good test to make sure that your ribber dial is set up correctly. You can see I do have stitches on all of those ribber needles, so I'm sure that worked. If you're not getting stitches, it might be that this knob needs to be loosened and then move farther in toward the center. This is your V-cam essentially for the ribber. It makes a deeper stitch. So if you have yarn here but the stitches aren't actually knit, that probably means this needs to move farther back in. Another couple troubleshooting things to check are that the yarn feeder is in position and that the needles are able to just pass under the yarn feeder. So now I'm going to go ahead and crank a few rows, maybe 10. And I want to stop and see how they're lined up. You can see here that my ribber needles are lined up correctly with these cylinder needle slots. If they were incorrect, you would see them all like bunched up like this. After you'd been cranking for a while, they would be really lined up right against each other, and that's how you'd know that you'd actually removed the incorrect cylinder needles. Okay, so I have removed the correct cylinder needles, and that is all knitting as it should. So I'll make a note for Wanna Selvage Cast On that I need to remove every other cylinder needle for me, starting with the first needle after the main mark. At this point, you can go ahead and unwind your yarn, and just like when you don't have the ribber in, you can just crank forward and it will remove your project from the ribber so that you can measure your gauge. Be careful not to drop the needles because they can get caught down in between the camshell and the cylinder. So just be careful as you're removing them, as you continue to turn around, that they don't fall and get lost. So you look at your swatch for the leg warmer and make sure that it's as wide as you want it to be. Remember that you want it to be a little bit wider than it normally would for a sock, so it can fit over or pants or tights or leggings or whatever. But then you also don't want it to be so loose that it won't stay up. So the cuff at the top, you want to make sure will stay up. My sample that I'm going to do is for a child, and so I think this is going to be just fine for my purpose. And then I can measure the rows per inch to calculate how many rows I want there to be total, and then subtract out the number of rows for the two cuffs. Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.